we should be good.
Okay.
So yeah, without further ado, this is Mott. Welcome. And thank
Yep.
you.
Thank you all for coming today. As Jules said, I'm currently the head of collections at Clark University. Before that, I was coordinator of archives and special collections before I got my promotion to be head of all collections. Yeah, before 2008, I spent my whole career in archives. So both in the business archives world and then in academia, so a couple different areas. I earned my doctorate here at Simmons in 2008, so I'm pretty familiar with the campus, although things are certainly changing. And as Jules said, I'm former president of ACA, and before that I was treasurer. So pretty much when you want to ask questions, I can pretty much answer them. So at any rate, to move right along here. So ACA's mission, you can see up here, supports and promotes the highest level of professional archival practice, takes a leadership role by defining the knowledge and abilities necessary to be a professional archivist. It achieves its mission by certifying archivists, ensuring professional archival standards, and promoting the employment of certified archivists. Very abbreviated history. In 1987, SCoSAA Council created ACA. We started operations in 1989 with 756 members, and today we are up to over 1,200 members. Benefits of certification: offers a competitive advantage for jobs, provides an easily understood credential, gives employers an impartial tool for evaluating applicants, builds your confidence in your abilities, and strengthens the profession. To give you an example of some of the employers who just last year were seeking certified archivists in their job ads, NASA, Princeton University, Archdiocese of Atlanta, State of Oregon, California Institute of Technology, Ford Motor Company, City of Fort Worth, Texas, University of Texas, Massachusetts Municipal Association, State of Missouri, University of Colorado, J.P. Morgan Chase, and City of Minneapolis. A lot more, but those were just to give you a sample. You can see that there's a lot of different kinds of employers, and the next screen kind of points that out as well. Members are employed across a wide range of, employed by a wide range of employers, and these numbers are not exactly what the whole profession's numbers are, but they're pretty close. Over a third in academic, nearly a third in governmental, and then on down the line. Exam requirements. So there are 3 ways of qualifying to take the ACA exam. One is with a master's degree with an archival concentration with 3 or more classes, plus 1 year of qualifying professional experience. Another way is a master's degree without that specialization, but then you need additional years of professional archival experience to qualify. And again, a little footnote here. It's a full-time equivalent, so like, what was it, last year I was on, as immediate past president, I was on the committee that reviewed exam applications. We had one person who cobbled together 1 year of experience with 4 different jobs. They were either temporary or part-time or both, And so this person just cobbled it together using, now that's very unusual, but nevertheless, it's not that unusual for somebody to use at least 2 employers to get their experience. And to talk a little more about qualifying experience, must be professional work in an archives. So not the kind of work that one would expect from a paraprofessional, but what professionals do. And internships and volunteer work might qualify if it consists of the kind of work a professional archivist does. And if this is important to you, definitely contact our Regent for Exam Administration. You know, there's a lot of gray area there. For example, if you have an internship and that was one of your 3 classes, you can't double dip. You can't use it as, even though sometimes you can use an internship towards your qualifying experience. That's not true if you only had 3 archival classes and one of them was the internship. So there's a lot of detail. So if that's concerning to you, definitely contact the Regent. The third way, and probably the most important for you, is, since you haven't graduated yet, is the provisional certification method of sitting for the exam. That requires you having finished your master's degree with those 3 or more archival courses, but you don't need to have the professional experience, because if you pass the exam, you'll be a provisional member, and then you'll have to go back to be a full member and get that professional experience. Why is that important? Because you can tell an employer, hey, I passed the exam. If you hire me, I'll get my 1-year professional experience. So, you know, bring me on. And again, you can apply before graduating. I know that there are some students from other institutions that have applied already for this year's exam. And what you'd have to do, applying before you graduate, is send in, obviously, an incomplete transcript, but then once you graduate, you send in your finished transcript showing you've graduated, and then you can sit for the exam. So let's see here. Yeah, so again, you'll need to get your 1-year experience, and you aren't a full member till you get your experience, but on the other hand, you don't have to pay dues, so that, you know, so that's a good thing. So let's move along here. Exam requirement. Okay, so preparing for the exam, you don't really need to know this to take the exam, but it would help you understand what you need to study and how to study for it. And so we've created a role delineation statement, which is basically what we think is everything that an archivist does for a professional archives job falls into one of these 7 categories. And obviously they're rather broad, and when you see the full role delineation statement, there's many subparts to each of these 7 domains. At any rate, for those who can't read the screen, we've got the first domain is selection, appraisal, and acquisition. The second is arrangement and description. The third, reference, services, and access. The fourth, preservation and protection. The fifth, outreach, advocacy, and promotion. The sixth, managing archival programs. And the seventh, professional, ethical, and legal responsibilities. If you haven't figured it out, number 7 is kind of a catch-all for anything else that doesn't fit into the other 6. So, and as I said, each domain has subunits, and they're called knowledge statements and task statements. So the preceding domains in the RDS is a listing. Oh, before the domains of the RDS, there's general knowledge statements that are so broad that they don't fit into any one of those categories. There's a few of those. And then each domain, as I said, is subdivided. They have multiple knowledge statements and multiple task statements. So I know this is all kind of like, okay, how does this really work? So to give you an example of how this works and how it finally gets funneled down into the creation of an exam question. So as an example, domain number 4, preservation and protection. One of its multiple task statements is ensure the correct long-term storage of records and papers by such techniques as using proper containers and encasements, using acceptable shelving, and maintaining acceptable environment controls. For the next screen, please remember the acceptable environment controls. Then, as far as that was a task statement, a knowledge statement. Archivists know and can apply knowledge about the causes and consequences of the deterioration of various media and formats. Please note again, causes and consequences of deterioration of various medias and formats. So that leads us to a particular question. And this question is, what are the recommended storage conditions for the permanent preservation of color film? Now, you can see the RHs are the same. The relative humidity is 30 to 40%. But if you're at 30 to 40% and you want to permanently preserve color film, what's the temperature that you should be trying to achieve? That's the question. So your 4 options are 67 degrees Fahrenheit, 45 degrees Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Fahrenheit, and 26 degrees Fahrenheit. Would anybody like to take a stab at this? Anybody a visual materials expert?
I did know this once.
Yeah, I read it somewhere.
Yeah.
26.
Correct. Yes.
Excellent.
Yes. I'm very happy to hear that. Now, I used to run a moving image archive. So this, I know, not a problem. I know that other archivists would have a bit of an issue with this. And actually, that's with a 30 to 40% relative humidity. If it's up closer to 50%, you're talking dropping that temperature down to around 0. And the reason why this fools a lot of people is you think 32 degrees, stuff freezes, it doesn't change. No, that's water freezes and doesn't change. That doesn't mean that the chemical reactions that cause the deterioration of color film stops. So that's a really important thing to know. And so, you are correct. And I highlight, so with a lot of questions, you can't read questions too fast, because if you skipped over the permanent preservation or the color film part, you're in big trouble. I mean, as an example, if you skipped over the color film part and you're just thinking black and white, oh, that temperature's going to be significantly higher than 26 degrees. So you would probably jump onto the bandwagon of the option C, 37 degrees. At any rate, so one of the things from this is when a question is developed, it must be based on the material in the professional literature. So it's got to be based on at least one knowledge statement or task. It's got to kind of answer that. And it's got to come from something in the professional literature. People can't be making up questions. It's just, oh, this sounds like a good answer. No, that doesn't work. And then, so the citation for this one is the Ritzenthaler book about photographs that SAA printed in 2006. That's a real standard go-to for photographs in particular, visual materials in general. So let's see here. So to prepare for the exam, you need to read broadly. You know, there's in our online exam handbook, there's a bibliography for each of the domains. Here are some suggested readings. When I was vice president, I served on the exam development committee, which is why I can tell you all about this. And I was preservation and protection. So, and I know that this question's been retired, which I think it was because it was considered a really hard question. So I really applaud our student for getting it right, yay. Because, yeah, I was treasurer when they used this, and there was, some people complained after the exam about this question. And I'm like, as a visual materials person, I have like zero sympathy. You know, I'm like, oh yeah, that's an easy question. You know? But no, for a lot of archivists, it's a little bit more difficult. So there is a bibliography in the exam handbook that's available free, online, PDF, printed out. But not all the questions come off of those, let's say, half dozen or 8 things listed for preservation protection. I will tell you that so there are approximately 200 questions in the item bank for just preservation protection. And on any one exam, you'll have approximately 13 appear. So even if I wanted to, I couldn't tell you exactly what citations are going to be used and which aren't. I can tell you that when I was tasked with preservation protection, I made sure that those pieces in the bibliography reflected the items in the item bank for preservation protection that were used the most or appeared the most. So there's other things that you probably should be reading about photography, but the one that was cited most often in the preservation item bank was the Ritzenthaler book. Another suggestion for those of you who want to prepare, you need to read much more broadly than this. However, the place you should start and end your preparation are the books in the Archival Fundamental series from SAA. Now, not every one of those 7 domains has a corresponding book in the Archival Fundamental series, but if yours does, you want to know. You want to read more broadly than that, but you definitely want to know that book. So, any questions about that? No, okay, moving right along. So, how to apply. So, you can go to our website, and we have a webpage, Get Certified, and download the application, use the online form. You can also find the exam handbook there, webpage listing all of the exam sites for the upcoming exam, et cetera, et cetera. When you apply, you need to keep this in mind. Be prepared. You're going to need to attach a PDF for your graduate school transcript. In addition to filling out the form, you need to attach a PDF of your graduate school transcript. And then if you're going in as a Group 1 or Group 2 applicant, as opposed to a provisional applicant, you'd also need a PDF of your job description and your supervisor's letter. And even provisionals eventually will need those once they get around to becoming full members, but in the short run, you don't need that. And make sure to give yourself plenty of time to gather all these supporting materials. I know that, again, I was on the exam application committee twice, and there'd be people running up to the deadline. They thought they gave themselves more than enough time, and then, you know, maybe the supervisor got sick or whatever, and, you know, so not all of this is fully in your control. Plan ahead. So, at any rate, so application fee, non-refundable $50 fee by May 31st of this year, or $25 for the early bird deadline, which is February 15th, which explains why some people have applied already for this year. They want to get in on the early bird, so it's a 50% discount on the fee. And there's another benefit to applying early that I will mention in just a minute. Yeah, we have limited, might help those traveling long distances. Most people don't get, but a few do. And you can apply for the travel award June 1st. Where to take the exam? So this year, every year it moves around, but every year it is at the location of the SAA annual meeting, and it's that week. So that's the when, and wherever it is, it's definitely going to be there. So in addition, we always have six predetermined sites. One's the SAA site, and there's 5 others spread across the country. This year, they're Columbia, South Carolina, Los Angeles, California, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, St. Paul, Minnesota, and Salt Lake City, Utah. But then there is also the Pick Your Site program, so you can pick where you want to be if you convince enough other people to also want that same location. So, this is the other benefit of applying early. It only takes 3 applicants requesting a city for us to put an exam site there. After February 15th, you need 5 total applicants requesting a city. Once we start doing this early bird deadline, most of our exam sites have been picked by late February. You can see, for example, 2 years ago, we had 20 total exam locations. And so only 6 of them were predetermined. The rest of them, the applicants chose. And it's perfectly fine to, you know, get a few friends together and compare notes. Something tells me it wasn't a coincidence last year when in less than 6 hours, we got 3 applications from Salt Lake City, all saying they wanted to pick your site in Salt Lake City. All of them were, at that time, currently in the online San Jose State program. Call me crazy or conspiracy theorist, but I think there was more to it than coincidence. And in fact, another story about a Pick Your Site. One time, many years ago, we actually had a Pick Your Site in Hong Kong. And you're like going, why Hong Kong? What happened was a bunch of expats who worked for US-based companies in the Far East all decided, hey, let's, you know, bring it closer to us. And so that's what happened. So the Pick Your Site really does, you know, there's the $50 charge. I know to graduate students that sounds like a lot, but really in the full big scheme of things, it can be a lot more depending upon where you need to go to take the exam. So this lets people, if there's a body of people who want to go and take it in one place, they can do so. And in fact, this year already, we have 2 pick your sites, Dallas and Atlanta. So we're already on the train, heading down the tracks to more exam sites. And as I said, after the early bird deadline, February 15, I am sure that there will be a lot more. So, at any rate, any questions about how that works? Yes?
Yeah, sorry if you already clarified this and I missed it. But for the pick your site, are all of these exams taking place on August 15th?
The exact same time.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're all taking place at the exact same time. Yeah, we only offer the exam once a year, but, and after the exam, we always send out a post-exam survey, and won't bore you with other results. But one of them is that it is amazing how small a number of people, you know, one of the questions will be, why didn't you take the exam before? You know, and, oh, I hadn't heard about ACA, hadn't graduated yet, and felt I needed to study more, blah, blah. One of them is, didn't have a good location. Another one is, wasn't a good time. Each year, we only get like 1 or 2% of the people turning in the survey saying, oh, it wasn't a good time. Amazingly. And I think it's just because all archivists are so focused on the SAA annual meeting. You know, it's always our biggest location. I mean, we'll have dozens of people taking it there. It's pretty noteworthy when we have more than a dozen people taking it at any other location. But at the SA site, you're talking dozens of people taking it. So, so yeah, I think that's the reason why there isn't more of a plea for different times. Did that fully answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, let's see here. Moving right along. Exam results. So 1 or 2 months after taking the exam, you will get your results. Historically, what have the exam results been like? You're kind of wondering, no doubt. The pass point for the exam varies a little from year to year depending upon the difficulty of the questions. And I'll give you an example. So I already gave you an example of a retired question that a lot of people think is fairly difficult. I'll give you an example of a much easier one that has been required. Now this time, watch nobody gets this right, after we did so well with the tough question. So, Freedom of Information Act. What body of the government does that cover? Is it A, the legislative branch, B, the executive branch, C, the judicial branch, or D, all of the above? Freedom of Information Act, what branch or branches of the government does it cover? No.
Oh.
Is it just the executive branch?
Just what?
Just the executive branch?
Bingo, just the executive branch, yes. So, and trust me, if you were an archivist in the federal government, you would know that without a doubt. You know, so that kind of gets, and so again, the one question most people see as more difficult than the other, and that's why the pass point varies from year to year. It depends on, we get a bunch of experts to look at the exam and figure out how easy or difficult each of the questions is. And so if you have a bunch of tough questions that year, the pass point's going to drop. If you have a bunch of easy questions that year, the pass point's going to rise. So there isn't a pass point. There's an A pass point for 1 year, but every year it's going to be a little different. Now, to talk averages or what happened in recent years. In recent years, the pass point for the exam has ranged from the high 60s to the mid 70s. So 100 questions, the pass point is generally somewhere between the high 60s and mid 70s. And again, all of the recent years, that's where the pass point has been. In recent years, the percentage of people who have passed the exam has ranged from the mid-70s to the mid-80s. So somewhere in recent years, somewhere between mid-70s percentage of people to mid-80s percentage of people pass the exam. And no, nobody has ever gotten a perfect score. So out of the literally thousands of people who have taken the exam, nobody has ever gotten a perfect score. So let's move right along here. And some, as you'll see in a minute, there's some of the people, a few, very few, of the people who take the exam have already been certified. So even people who've already been certified, who have retaken the exam, have never gotten a perfect score. So there's always some tough questions in there. So don't beat yourself up thinking you need to get a perfect score. So let's see here. Fee is associated with certification. Application fee is $50, or as I've already mentioned, the early bird application fee is $25. Then once you pass the exam, and qualify for full certification, you need to pay a $150 certification fee. That does cover your first year's dues. So generally speaking, people get notice in the early fall that they passed, they pay that, and so for the next 6, 9 months, whatever it is, they don't have to pay dues. Now with provisional people, they might get fully certified any time of the year. So, and our fiscal year is July 1st. So any time after July 1st, you get fully certified. That $150 fee covers that. So, at any rate, annual dues $50, and as I said, July 1st. Let's see here. Recertification. So, as I said, some, very few, recertify through taking the exam. Why you would do that, I don't know. It's bad enough the first time, although we have it, like I know somebody who's been certified almost the whole time. Certification's been around over 25 years, and he always recertifies through the exam. Why is that? He is in the middle of the Great Plains. Getting to an exam site would be incredibly expensive, yes, but getting the recertification points needed to certify is even more expensive in his eye, because he's nowhere near anything. So, petition, what most certified archivists do. So, how do you recertify through petition? The easiest way to accumulate points are continuing education credits. So, usually through SAA, sometimes other bodies. And so again, if you're out in the middle of nowhere, it costs a lot to travel to go to each of those continuing education programs. Although more are available online now than years before, so that's a good thing. But nevertheless, sometimes it's seen as just too onerous. So there are 5 ways of accumulating points for recertification through petition. The 5 general ways. One is you can accumulate some points from being employed as an archivist. Not enough to get fully recertified, but nevertheless. As I said, education. So if you go to annual meetings for SAA or NEA or anybody like AMIA, since I was a moving image archivist, all those count. Going to continuing education workshops, taking classes, that sort of thing. Another area is professional participation. One of the things that falls under that is if you were teaching a continuing education workshop or something like that. Another one is professional leadership, so I got points when I was president of ACA, but you'd also get points if you were president of whatever, NEA or anything else. And then writing and editing. So if you write an article that pertains to archival management and get it published, then you get a certain number of points for that. So there's a number of different ways of accumulating your points. And again, that's the way most people recertify. Now you might be saying, why is recertification so important? Well, this is what most professions do to make sure that their professionals stay up to speed with the changes that are going on in the profession. Unfortunately, this is not the way that the library profession works. You get an MLS, and no matter how out of touch you become with the profession, you're still, your MLS is still as good as it was the day you graduated. To make it a more specific example, I knew a couple of librarians who for 15 years never left their library to do any kind of continuing education. No workshops, no courses, no conferences, no meetings, nothing. Explain to me how they could possibly be as competent at the end of that 15-year period as they were at the beginning of that 15-year period. That's why it's so important for a profession to have some sort of way to make sure that their professionals stay up to speed. I mean, this is what the medical field does, what lawyers do. My wife's a CPA, she has to recertify every 2 years. So this is the way most professions actually work. And the petitioning process is simple if you are prepared. That is, if you are a good archivist with your own personal papers, petitioning process is easy. I just have this little manila folder, and every time I do anything that I can get certification points, boom, a piece of paper goes into that folder. At the end of 5 years, I pull out that folder. Now, the papers in there are a jumble. They are a mess, but everything's right in that folder. No problem. Takes me a little while to organize it all, but it's not that tough to recertify if you do. It's the people who don't do, keep track of it in some way. I'm not saying it has to be a folder. It can be, a folder on your computer, electronically store stuff, whatever. But the petition process isn't tough if you just plan ahead. Please. So, let's see here. Moving right along. So, some of our web pages again are URL certifiedarchivists.org. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, so you can find out about us in all those various locations. On our website, there are many things. As I said, the exam application, the exam handbook, and again, in the exam handbook, you can find the role delineation statement, the bibliography of suggested readings, and some sample questions. And then there's a lot of other, if you care to find out more about us, there's all kinds of stuff on our webpage. You can find out a lot about us there. So, last but not least, questions. If you can ask me now, but if you go back home and say, oh, there's a question I wish I would have asked Mott, well, you can try and hunt me down, that's for sure, but you can also contact ACA and get your answer that way. So, there we go. Quick zip through the wonderful world of the Academy of Certified Archivists. What questions do we have here? Yes?
You might have said this, but I know for some other certifications, they do practice tests. Does ACA have any of those?
No, we don't have practice exams. We do have, like 10 sample questions in the exam handbook. We have, in the last year or two, on a couple of occasions, done an exam prep session. The first time was a couple years ago during my presidency. Oh, let's, to try and keep costs down, let's do it in Google Hangouts. we crashed Google. Yeah, we had more than twice as many turnaways as people who could get into it because we were doing it for free. So you max out at 25. So it was supposed to be, operative word, supposed to be co-taught by our exam, region for exam administration, the person who puts forward the test, and the region for exam development, the person who actually develops the questions in the exam. The second person couldn't get on because at 5 of, we'd already maxed out Google Hangouts. So even one of the presenters couldn't get on because we had maxed it out like 5 minutes before it was supposed to begin. So, so we know that there's a need. It's a matter of us trying to figure out how to do this. And I know that $50 a year probably sounds a lot to you, but I'm, as treasurer, for 4 years, I was trying to run a national certifying body on $80,000 a year. That may sound like a lot. It's not. For you and me, it's a lot of money. But for a national certifying body, that's not a lot. So we're trying to figure out ways of how to do this on a shoestring. And so we know there's a need. I know that even to this day, there's discussions about how to fulfill that need. But doing it on the cheap is the big question, so, at any rate. So, unfortunately, no real exam prep sessions. You know, and even if we were to do it, when we did do it, it wasn't like, oh, here are a lot of questions, you know, pretend that you're taking the exam. It was more, some of what I said was a part of that, and they went into more detail about, you know, how it's created and the kinds of questions you'd be facing, that sort of thing. So, yeah, and again, it sounds, and we're constantly making more questions, but we're also constantly retiring questions. So, you know, when you think, okay, there's some domains, and we've got about 200 just in preservation, that sounds like a lot of questions, but not a lot of questions. So it's not like we would have to try and find questions we're retiring to put something like that together, but then if you're retiring them, there's probably something wrong with it. Usually something's been outdated. You know, like when I was doing the preservation domain, there was a question that I retired because the question had a citation, but I noticed it was an old citation. I went back and looked at the questions that had old citations, and many of them were still very valid, and I was able to actually give it a new citation that was much more recent. But there was one question where I'm like, oh, that's no longer the case. So in some cases, you're retiring a question because it's no longer valid. You know, that the preservation community has improved, like a lot of things have, and they found that this old thing that had been, widely believed really wasn't the case, or there was a better way of doing it. So are you better off with an exam prep with old questions that no longer are good? Not so sure about that. The two I gave you are still valid pieces of information that for whatever reason we retired, but yeah, we put a lot of time in on making questions for the exam. I don't know if the exam development committee would be really psyched about making questions that will never be used in the exam, but for exam prep program, no offense, but it takes time. So. Yes?
I'm sure this is fairly obvious because you have opportunities for recertification, But if you fail the first time you take it, can you take it
Yes.
the next year?
Yes,
Okay.
you can certainly take it, again, and if you fail the first time, and I would hope that from a program like Simmons, this wouldn't happen, but that, yes, you wouldn't, you'd officially have to reapply, but duh, if you qualified last year, you're qualified. And so, again, I was on the exam application committee, and so when we saw somebody who had sat for it before, whether it was the year before or 2 years before, whenever, we're like, well, they qualified then, we haven't changed the qualifications, boom, they're in. You know, so it wouldn't be a question then. You're gonna sit, you know, you fill out the application, you're gonna sit for the exam. So, any other questions?
I got plenty I can ask.
What?
I got plenty of questions. I mean, well, I was gonna throw a really general one out, which is, and you might have actually touched on this at the beginning when I was like typing and not paying attention, but I was just wondering about like the broad sort of concept behind certification, and like, it's a very academic question, I guess, but like specifically, you know, I've heard people say, why do we need this? Why is there an extra thing, like an extra hoop we have to jump through? I could personally see some reasons, and I think you kind of touched on that with like, you know, like the bar exam and like.
Yeah, I would say that a big piece of it in my mind is the recertification part. I mean, you know, if an employer is seeking qualified archivists and they put in their ad a certified archivist, then, and when we're creating the exam, what we're trying to create is not the great archivist can pass the exam. No, we literally, let me see if I can remember the exact phrase. We are trying to test for minimally qualified professional archivists. A minimally qualified professional archivist should be able to pass the exam. And that's what we're looking for when we create the exam, is that somebody with that much knowledge, skills, background should be able to pass this thing. And those who don't shouldn't be able to pass this thing. To give you an interesting look into the exam development process, we'll look at how questions did in previous exams. When we're putting it together, we're like, oh, okay, well, we have a history of what years each question was asked and how it tested. And so you'll look at a question and go, you know, okay, one example was that we would even go into the weeds and say, okay, how well did this question, people who took the exam that year, who ended up passing the exam, how did they do versus on the same question the people who ultimately failed the exam? And occasionally you would run into a question where the people who failed did better on a question than the people who passed it. You're going, oh no, what's going on with it? Now, it could be a statistical fluke, especially if there's not much of a difference, but you know, it puts when you're creating the exam, it puts a question in your mind, okay, is there something wrong with this question? Or another question where you've got the right answer and 3 wrong answers, obviously, but almost everybody who selected a wrong answer chose the same wrong answer. So there's 3 distractors, but only one was distracting. And if it's too high a percentage, you're like, okay, what's wrong with the question? But if lots of people are getting the question right, we might say, okay, we need to beef up one of those 2 non-distracting distractors. Because, you know, not enough people are being distracted, and they're all being distracted towards one. The other 2 are lame distractors, obviously. Just need to better job at distracting people. So, but on the other hand, you don't want, like a wrong answer, a distractor getting most of the answers either. So it's a really interesting process putting the exam together. Because again, the goal is to find minimally qualified professional archivists. That's the goal. That's what we want to do, and that's what we want to test for. That's what we want to create the questions to go into the exam to do. So long answer to your question, but just to give you more of a feel for how this whole thing works. Questions? Any online questions?
Not yet.
Okay.
I did ask if they had any.
Okay, good. Thank you for asking them. Yes.
So I might be alone in this, but so I'm on the archival track and I've never heard of the archivist certification. Is it something that is becoming more and more popular, you see, as
It is to some extent. The other thing I will fully admit is in some parts of the country it's a bigger thing than others. New England is actually where we have the least, if you put on your marketing hat, market penetration. We, for various historical reasons and other reasons that I'm sure I'm not aware of, this is where we, if you want to start your career, for example, in the Southwest, where the Southwest Archivist Regional Group is, good luck to you without certification. So the one extreme would be New England, to be very honest with you people. We certainly have certified archivists. I mean, you probably have heard of Gregor Trinkus Randall with MBL, Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, big in preservation and security. He's going to be our president next year. So we have certified archivists in New England. As I read to you, there's some employers in New England, but you go to other parts of the country. I mean, Georgia's big for us. Most of Western Mississippi is really big for us. But yeah, not New England so much. So just, again, I'm trying to sell you on this, but I'm not bullshitting you, so.
but it is growing?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, when I was treasurer, we were at 1,000. We're now over 1,200. So, and that's only been, that's in less than a decade. So we're growing at to be comparative, we're growing faster than SAA's membership. Not that we're in competition with them, but that kind of gives you an idea of how fast the profession as a whole is growing, and we're definitely growing faster than the profession as a whole.
I just have like a follow-up. Do you think, or do you know if there's a reason why that it's disparate, why people's interest in having certified archivists? Or your personal opinion?
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to go that far into the weeds. As I think I'll go back to what I said before. To some extent, it's historical. New England is all in our 20-some year history. It's always been our weak area, geographically. And I mean, some places it makes sense we're strong. I mean, when you've got, for example, the state of Missouri, if you want to work in the state archives, you have to be certified. Well, that's a pretty big employer. So we had, I mentioned the pick your sites. It was for like a dozen straight years. We had a pick your site location in Missouri. Over a course of 12 years, we had an exam site there 14 times. After they decided we want to hire certified archivists, everybody wanted to be an well, not everybody, But a lot of people who wanted to be an archivist in Missouri said, well, I wouldn't mind being a state working for the state archives, so I better become certified. So to some extent, it's how many employers in the area are asking for it, but then to some extent, that's also a chicken and the egg argument. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? So I could go into more detail, but I don't think we need to go there. If you really care for more detail, ask me afterwards. Any other questions? Comment statements? Last call.
Everyone just covered all the ones I was gonna ask.
Okay, fair enough. So going once,
Nothing else the internet.
going twice. Oh, come on, people on the internet. Come on. So, okay, so thank you very much for coming and learning more about ACA and archival certification. Again, hope you decide to, if you decide to stay in the archival field, that I hope you decide to become a certified archivist. Thank you very much.